During the summer, there are a lot of different lures and techniques that will work. I mean, I love using a topwater. I love using a deep diving crankbait, but no matter where I have gone across the country, whether it is a lake that is really shallow, whether it is a river, whether it is clear, whether it is muddy, no matter the circumstances of the body of water that we are fishing, a simple, soft plastic of some sort tends to be my absolute go-to when it comes to summertime bass fishing. So in this video, I'm actually gonna give you my top 4 summertime soft plastics that catch me bass no matter where I go. So stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. This video is brought to you by Fin Fishing. Right now over at Fin Fishing, I am running a package deal for the month of June. Anyone who picks up a USA made sun shirt, which I have a bunch of different colors and they're one of the only ones made here in the US, will get a free rod glove. This is a neoprene rod glove. It is a really high quality rod glove. It helps you to protect your rods, keep your rods organized, as well as not getting snagged constantly like those mesh rod gloves. So it's really simple. All you gotta do, add the sun shirt that you want to cart, add that rod glove that you want to cart, and you will see that automatic discount at checkout. Shopping at Fin Fishing is truly the best way to help support the Bass Fishing HQ channel, and I greatly appreciate it. Now, before we get into the 4 techniques, you guys should absolutely know that I'm going to save my very favorite one for last. It's something that I've really kind of done a lot more over the last couple of years, and it's a technique that I think a lot of anglers simply still have not picked up, and it's one that absolutely catches a ton of fish, especially in high pressure situations, so stick around for that. But technique in soft plastic number 1 is flipping and pitching soft plastic creature baits. Now, there are a ton of different creature baits out there on the market. You guys have probably seen me testing out the Crush City Bronco Bug a lot lately, and that is a great bait, but over the years, there's a few that I have really drawn kind of close to, the ones that I trust, that I catch fish all over the place, and that is a Berkley Pit Boss, an X-Zone Adrenaline Crawl, and a Zoom Speed Crawl. These 3 baits are all kind of similar because they all have a little bit of that kicking motion to them, and during the summer, I tend to like baits that have a little bit more kick to them because you're obviously going to be experiencing high water temperatures during the summer. So a bass's metabolism is a lot higher, and it seems like when they have a high metabolism, they like a little bit of kick. When you're dealing with a little bit colder water, it seems like you can get into baits that have too much kick, where they will stay away from them. And that's when I'm going to flip and pitch baits like a Sweet Beaver a lot. But during the summer, I like the baits that kick. Now, when I am fishing and where I'm fishing these baits really all involve 2 main things, and that is either vegetation or shade. Vegetation is absolutely a place that you need to fish during the summer, whether that's lily pads, whether that's reeds, whether that's offshore milfoil, coontail, hydrilla. If you have a lot of vegetation, that water is going to be in the shade most of the time. And I've seen a lot of times where you pull up into a lily pad field and the water temp, although shallower, might be 2, 3, 4 degrees cooler than it is on the main lake. And that's because that vegetation provides a lot of shade. Now, I also like to fish vegetation that is off the bank. Last year, I got to go up to New York and flip and pitch a lot of milfoil that was 12, 13, 14 foot tall. And in these situations, I am going to pick up a smaller creature bait. Now, the big thing that you need to figure out when kind of fishing around vegetation like this is really the size of weight that you need to use, because you can absolutely use a weight that is too big and you can absolutely use a weight that is too small. I have actually seen a number of times where I think that I need a bigger weight than is necessary, and I'm flipping like a 1 ounce weight into heavy cover thinking that that's what I need. And I've seen days where I can actually fish through fish because I'm using too big of a weight. It plops down in the water. You simply don't need that weight, and you can fish over fish. But there's also something to be said about fishing too light of a weight. You don't want to fish an 1/8 ounce, a 1/4 ounce weight where that bait can't necessarily get into the grass, get into those holes, get into the clumps where the bass are. So a lot of times when I am fishing in vegetation in summer with these small creature baits, I'm going to live between about the 3/8 ounce size and 3/4 ounce size a lot. But the big thing that I have learned is that the smallest weight that you can get away with and still be efficient out there on the water is typically the one that you want. The smaller weight typically gets a few more bites. You also typically have less problems. And as long as you can still be efficient, meaning getting that bait in and out of cover very fast, you are going to get a lot of bites. Now, it's not just vegetation that is gonna hold summertime bass. I also like to flip and pitch wood areas, specifically up inside rivers. You know, later in the year, once that thermocline really starts to rise in these lakes, a lot of fish get pushed up into shallow water. And when that happens, I tend to find a lot of bass that are way up inside of main creeks or rivers that are attached to a lake. You will literally go way up these places and you will find a ton of shade in these creeks. Now, a lot of times in those situations, again, it's a Texas rigged creature bait that I'm going to flip and pitch around wood cover or whatever the cover is that I am fishing. Now, when it comes to flipping and pitching, the equipment that I use kind of varies. You know, if I'm fishing a lot of vegetation that is offshore, I actually like a 7-foot, 1-inch rod that has 30-pound braid to a 20-pound fluorocarbon leader. But there are times where I'm fishing up in the jungle. I mean, up in a mat. And in that situation, I like a 7-foot, 6-inch rod with straight 50-pound braided line. So you really just kind of have to match your tackle to what you are fishing. Now, technique and soft plastic number 2 is fishing a big worm, specifically a worm like a Zoom Old Monster or an X-Zone Blitz worm. These two worms are by far my favorite big worms out there on the market. They are both around that 10.5 to 11-inch range. And the thing about these worms is they get a ton of bites. I know that picking these up, if you've not picked these up before, it may be a little bit intimidating because it's a rather long worm and you think, man, is a bass even going to be able to choke this thing down its mouth? I can tell you without a doubt, I've caught a lot of 8 and 9 and 10-inch bass on a 11-inch worm in the past. So they will absolutely choke it. Now, when I am fishing a big worm, I am primarily fishing offshore structure in cover. You know, this is something that I absolutely love to do, is go out there, use my electronics to idle around and actually find groups of fish that are relating to drop-offs, to humps, to points. A lot of times what you're gonna find is you're gonna find a rock pile or a little ledge or a shell bed or a brush pile or a single stump that actually has a lot of fish around it. And one of my absolute favorite ways to catch that, again, throwing that big worm out there and just dragging it across the bottom. I've also seen days where bass will not hit a crankbait. They will not hit a big swim bait. They will not hit a spoon, but they will absolutely eat that big worm. Now, when it comes to fishing that big worm, one of the most important things that I can tell you, especially when you're fishing it off the bank, is use a really long rod. I like the Arc Tharp Series Offshore Special Rod. This is a 7-foot, 6-inch rod. It's a medium heavy power. I use this exact same rods for deeper swim baits, for hair jigs, sometimes for spoons, but absolutely it is a great big worm rod. And the reason that you want a rod that has a lot of length is that when you're casting a big worm around, maybe you're fishing a shell bed, a ledge, I like to make a pretty long cast. I mean, 90, 100, 110 feet. Now, I like to use straight fluorocarbon, usually like 15 to 17 pound fluorocarbon, depending on the cover that I'm fishing with a big worm. And when you go to set the hook and your bait is 100 feet out, you actually have quite a bit of slack in the line. And I know that you guys have seen me set the hook on big worm fish before, and I always get the same reaction like, dude, you don't need to set the hook that hard. And I'm telling you, you absolutely do need to set the hook that hard when you make a super long cast out there, because you are trying to drive a hook into a fish that also out of a plastic into a fish that might be over 100 feet away with fluorocarbon. And when you set the hook on straight fluorocarbon, like I said, you're gonna have some stretch. Fluorocarbon doesn't stretch as much as mono, but it still stretches quite a bit. I mean, maybe 17, 18, 20% of that line is going to stretch. So setting the hook pretty hard at a distance, I think is absolutely necessary to drive that hook, to get that barb into that fish's mouth. So I really like a long rod to do that. And also, one of the big things that I have found with big worms is, again, use as light as weight as possible and do not peg the weight. At any time that I fish a big worm, almost every time except for like really sticky brush piles, I'm not going to peg my weight. I am going to let that thing slide up and down. I feel like you get a lot more bites by doing that. I'm also going to use a 3/8 ounce weight most of the time when I'm big worm fishing, unless it's a little bit deeper, then I might step up to a 1/2 ounce. But a big worm is absolutely a bait that you need to have tied up, rigged up, and ready to go in the summer. Now, technique in soft plastic number 3 is a drop shot. Specifically, you guys know this, a robo worm. I absolutely fish a robo worm, the fat 6-inch robo worm, everywhere in the summertime. And I fished it for smallmouth, I fished it for spotted bass, I fished it for a ton of largemouth. And I think at times people think when you're fishing a drop shot that you might be just going for numbers, that you're not necessarily always going to catch the size. And I can tell you right off the get-go that that is just absolutely not the truth. I fished the Bassmaster Open several years ago on Lake Chickamauga, and I was catching fish on big worms, deep crankbaits, big spoons, and the biggest fish I caught all week was on a robo worm. Same exact thing, I was fishing another Bass Open on the James River, and I was catching fish flipping and pitching on chatterbaits, on topwaters, all kinds of different ways. The biggest fish I caught all week, again, on a drop shot, and both of those were the exact same worm. A robo worm, 6-inch fat worm, margarita mutilator color. Like, that is a really, really good worm. I catch fish in ponds on that worm. I catch them absolutely everywhere. Now, again, you're gonna see kind of a correlation between everything that I'm talking about. Always go with the lightest drop shot weight that you can get away with. You know, if I'm fishing in shallow cover, typically a quarter ounce is what I'm going to use, you know, and I will go up to a 3/8 ounce, probably up to about 20 or 25 foot of water, and then maybe up to a 1/2 ounce if I get past 25 foot of water. But if I can get away with a 1/4 ounce weight, I try to get away with a 1/4 ounce weight. This is something that Aaron Martin's, something that I always heard him talk about. And it seemed like he was always using a smaller weight than I would have used in that situation. And I'm telling you, using a smaller weight, what it does is it makes your worm look a lot more natural in the water. If you're using a really heavy drop shot worm, although you'll be able to feel the bottom really easily, it more or less kind of makes that worm not look that natural. It'll jiggle a little bit, but that line stays fairly taut and it doesn't look that natural. So go with the lightest weight that you can go with. I was fishing a tournament, another Bass Open on Lake Champlain a number of years ago. I'll never forget this because I had been using a 3/8 ounce and a 1/2 ounce weight to catch smallmouth bass on a drop shot. I primarily had a decent amount of wind every single day. I was catching a lot of fish. The second day of the tournament, it was as dead calm as I have ever seen Lake Champlain. Like, out in the middle, absolutely glass calm, kind of like you see behind me. And I completely stopped getting bites in an area that I knew had a lot of fish. This was before forward-facing sonar, but I knew there was a ton of fish. I simply made the change from going to a 3/8 ounce weight to a 1/4 ounce weight, casting it in the same areas in about 30 foot of water, and it was instant. I started catching a lot of fish, and it's just because it makes, again, that bait look that much more natural in the water. So always go with the lightest weight that you can get away with on your drop shot. Now, technique in soft plastic number 4 is one that is absolutely my favorite, and that is a depths cover scat. This is a bait that a lot of anglers, I feel like, simply do not understand. It is a heavy soft plastic bait that you fish weightless, and you can fish it in a lot of different situations out there on the water. I mean, you can skip this thing underneath docks, you can pull it on offshore structure and cover. It is a phenomenal bait, and it just gives a bass such a different action. Now, I haven't created this video yet, but I'm going to do kind of a full video on kind of what I've learned about fishing this bait over the last couple of years, and I'm gonna leave it linked right up here. So if you guys are watching this in a couple of months, it'll be right up in here in the corner. Also, don't forget to check out that fin fishing gear. I will see you guys in the next one.